Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to Newgrange, the day after the shortest day. My name is Claire Tuffy, and on behalf of the Office of Public Works and the National Monument Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, I want to welcome you here this morning. We are delighted to be here and know that we're safely launched into a new year. Sorry to say, our weather isn't great at the moment, but that's not going to stop us watching, waiting. And some of our crew here are predicting that we might get some clearance yet. So we'll just wait and see. With me this morning, as usual, is Dr. Frank Prendergast, Ireland's leading archaeoastronomer. And we have a great show lined up this morning, including footage, a reconstruction of some of the monuments from the late Neolithic that has never been seen, never been aired before. So hold on, sit tight, enjoy. We are thrilled with the response we have received during the last two broadcasts. We are delighted to learn where you're watching from, and we hope you're all safe and well wherever you're watching from this morning. Frank, what's it like to be this side of the winter solstice now?
Well, again, the magic of it all hasn't left us.
No.
And even though it's a rainy morning, we're on site at the most spectacular location, for me, in Ireland at this time. And what's significant about this morning is that from yesterday to today, the sun has now started to move backwards.
Yeah.
And it's actually shifted by about a fifth of its diameter.
Yeah.
So just about noticeable.
Yeah.
And what that means is we're going to get maybe an extra minute or two of daylight today compared to yesterday.
Yeah.
So bright days ahead.
Yeah.
And in a week's time, the sun will have moved a diameter backwards.
Yeah.
So even more light.
Yeah.
So gradually, inexorably, we're getting brighter days. And the year has turned.
The year has turned. And between now and the beginning of February, we'll have gained well over an hour in the day. So we're on the right side, we're going forward. Tell us about the winter solstice and how this monument is orientated and why it was orientated towards winter solstice.
This turning point of the year has symbolism and meaning in a ceremonial context, in a ritual context. And it was marked, in a sense, by the prehistoric people being aware of this position of the sunrise at this time of year. It wouldn't have been difficult to mark it or to know about it. Any farming community would have noticed this movement of the sun along the horizon from north down to south and back up again. And that, in a sense, dictates seasonal time very strongly. But it is that turning point that is so meaningful and symbolic. And aligning some of the tombs, particularly the passage tombs, on that turning point is what we see exemplified here at Newgrange in the Boyne Valley. And they would have constructed, in a sense, first an axis. They would have laid out some kind of a line on the ground so that the builders of this tomb and others like it would have begun to hold their stones into place and position. And architecturally, they were getting an alignment on that turning point of the sun on the horizon. They then gradually built up the tomb, stone by stone, building into it the incredible architecture that you see here on this visual. And we have the entrance, and we have the side view, and we have a section cutaway, and you see the whole complex of the chamber, its passageway, which is inclined upwards. And nonetheless, from the chamber, when viewed outwards to the horizon through the roof box, you can see the horizon when your eye is at ground level, just as Professor O'Kelly did in the video we showed yesterday.
Yeah.
And that is the magic of it all. And as the centuries and the millennia pass, there's another complex event happening with the sun. The tilt of the Earth's axis is changing perceptibly and gradually. And the sun is drifting northwards at the solstice, millennium on millennium, gradually but inexorably. It's doing that. And what that means for Newgrange is that gradually the spectacle will diminish or lose its prominence. But in the Neolithic, where the sun rose 2 diameters to the right of its present position, the view of the horizon there, of the sunrise now, using those trees as a marker line, show us what happens today. But 5,000 years ago, it would have been to the right. And what we can know from the surveys that have been done by Professor Tom Ray and others is that the beam of sunlight into the chamber would have been more direct, more powerful, more striking, and penetrated up further into the end recess.
Yeah, and stayed an extra 4 minutes.
Probably an extra 4 minutes, yeah.
And do you see our trees that we use as a marker?
Yes.
Do you think, and now obviously those trees weren't there 5,000 years ago, but do you think they would have used a marker on the horizon to remind them where the sun rose every year, or would they use a natural feature?
I think a natural feature is the best and most logical interpretation, because alignment studies of so many other prehistoric megalithic monuments, not just tombs, but stone rows and stone circles, suggest that prominent points in the landscape, like notches or peaks or slopes, they all featured in the cosmology of the people at that time. So very cleverly, they were using nature and the natural landscape to assist in terms of the alignment. And there we see in the Neolithic 5,000 years ago, or 3,200 BC, where the sun would have been, all being played out in this new product which has been launched by National Monument Service, Newgrange and Stellarium. And if you Google that, you have the wherewithal to do exactly what we are seeing here today.
Yeah, it is great fun, the Stellarium project. I played around with it myself, and it is just so interesting to be able to turn the clock back and to see the night sky as they would have seen it. And that's the view from the top of the monument. And no matter how optimistic we are here this morning in the Boyne Valley, you have to say it's a soft day.
A soft day.
Yeah. We have some brave souls who've joined us this morning, some of our regular friends, some people who have been coming to Newgrange for years. And it's great to see them all, and have to admire their bravery and their endurance and their courage this morning.
I loved the story yesterday told to us by one of the visitors of her son who was in a school, I think in Wexford, and their teacher has downloaded Stellarium and was playing it in the classroom to the students. Wasn't that wonderful?
Yeah. And I know too from messages we've received that a lot of schools are watching the broadcast in the mornings before they start their day. So a big shout out to everybody who's watching in a school. It's a nice way to start the day, just sitting, watching us all here. And we are delighted that you are joining us from your school, your classroom. And we always think when the school groups come here to Newgrange, especially the Leaving Cert History of Art students, we know, and you know, and your teachers know, that very often a question on Newgrange will come up in the History of Art Leaving Cert examination. So hopefully by watching these programmes and these broadcasts from Newgrange these mornings, you will have gotten top marks because you tuned in and you learnt all the facts and you saw all the stones and the decorated stones and the design of the monuments. So we're taking full credit for your A in your Leaving Cert coming up.
Another parent told me a wonderful story that never had she seen her children dress so fast and eat their breakfast so fast, so as to get this programme on their viewing list before going to school. So that was lovely.
Yeah, so it is great. Just thinking about the construction of Newgrange, the building of Newgrange, and I know this is something that all of our students in the different curricula, from the primary schools to the junior cert history to the Leaving Cert History of Art, study, is how the monument was actually constructed. So we have an animation that we're going to show you, which actually takes you step by step through the building of Newgrange. And the first thing, as Frank mentioned already, is the monument was aligned to midwinter sunrise. And this means that the monument is facing not east, but 62 degrees south of east. The tomb was designed around the axis of the alignment. And you'll notice that the beam of light, the dotted light, it's not just on the middle of the room, it's over to the right. Then they added the basin stones. One of the basin stones in the right-hand recess at Newgrange we think was placed in before they built the chamber. So the basin stones were positioned within recesses in the chamber, and it was on these stones that the cremated remains of the dead were placed.
This is the corbelling technique, a feat of incredible engineering, given the time. and how it has stood for 5,000 years without moving or shifting.
And something very important for this morning.
And it is rainproof, I believe.
Yes, still watertight after 5,000 years.
And how was that done, Claire?
Well, you can see that the corbels are all sloping, so that when the rain comes down, the water naturally flows off. And then smaller stones were put in between the corbels to strengthen it. And some of those stones that are in our roof now were last touched by a hand of a person who lived 5,000 years ago. And this is us today, the rain coming through, the cairn eventually, but because of the shape of the corbelled roof, the rain just runs off the side. And a mixture of burnt soil and sea sand was also placed within the monument. And you know why they left that there? So we could get a radiocarbon date.
Which we now have.
We now have. And in fact, Professor O'Kelly was the first person ever in Ireland to get a radiocarbon date for a monument. And then this is the building of the cairn.
And these are the water-rolled stones gathered from the floodplain below the ridge, all left by the Ice Age.
Yeah. And now this is the passage. And the building, these are called orthostats, standing stones. The passage at Newgrange is just 19 metres long. And there are 21 stones on one side and 22 on the other.
So much megalithic art has been discovered, not just on the external faces of the structural stones and within the chamber, but also hidden art. Isn't that true, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the art is hidden from view. This is a great invention. I wonder who was the person who thought, how about cutting a groove on some of the stones? And then we have everything is built around the light.
Can we claim the first drainage system?
Oh, I am,
invented?
yeah, for sure.
I think
For
we
sure.
should.
Yeah. But I always think too, when I tell visitors about the grooves on the upper side of the stones, that they must have built a roof that leaked before they all sat around and said, how about inventing a gutter? That might be an idea.
There was, in the Bronze Age or beyond, a catastrophic failure of part of the mound, and much of the cairn material, certainly at the front, rolled outwards and collapsed downwards on top of the entrance area. And Professor O'Kelly had a gargantuan task to restore the whole monument.
Yeah, and when they started excavating, they knew that there was an awful lot of quartz in the monument. In fact, Professor McAllister, who had worked at Newgrange in the 1920s, he envisaged that the whole mound would be covered in quartz. But O'Kelly found that the curb stones, these big stones at the base of the mound, they're all in their original position. And he was able to calculate from how the collapsed material lay out from the cairn the height and angle of the original wall. And that area that you see around the entrance, the grey area, you see where you go up the steps and go in behind the entrance stone, that's a modern feature. Originally, the white quartz came out as far as the edge of the carved stone, and then it turned inward. So the last thing they did before they brought the remains of the dead into the chamber was they carried the remains of the dead over the entrance stone. And for that reason, some people think that our entrance stone is like the threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And it is always strikes me at this time of the year, and you look at our wonderful curbstone one, that the only time that you cannot see the art clearly is when the sun is shining directly on the monument. And it's as if at this time of year, when the sun is shining directly on the entrance stone, that the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead is lowered. And perhaps this was the time when the spirits and the spirits of the ancestors came back.
When we think about the belief system and worldview of people then, we generally are in agreement that there was what's called a tripartite or a threefold division of their world. You had the landscape in which they lived and built their monuments and farmed and died and were born. But then you had the mysterious underworld into which the sun disappeared at sunset, as did many of the stars and the moon, and then rose again in the eastern horizon, predictably every day. And then you have the other world above, that realm of the darkness and the brightness and the sky. And what did they think was up there? We know precisely what's up there, but what did they perceive it as? That's the great mystery.
Yeah. And, you know, we learned so much over the years, and yet we cannot see the world like they saw it. Visitors come here all the time to us, and they ask us what the meaning of the art is. And all we can say is, we don't know. And they kind of feel that somehow we should know at this stage what it meant. But even if we found out tomorrow that 5,000 years ago the spiral represented the sun, we still don't know what the sun meant to people who lived here. So it's all about not only what it means, but what you bring to a meaning. And my friend Jean McMahon, that we worked with here for a long time, especially at Knockrow, she had a way of putting it. She said, a symbol is much more than words. A symbol has a different and a deeper meaning than words have. You know, a symbol can represent so much more than any simple language.
So true.
We'll never know.
When we go to Brittany, where a lot of the art is thought to have originated and then migrated westwards towards Ireland, some of that art is representational, which is fascinating, because in the Irish motif tradition, there is no representational art, perhaps one or two.
Yeah.
And they sort of mysteriously hint at form, which might be recognizable as a human face or artifact. But in Brittany, the evidence is very clear that representational art, using perhaps, or depicting some of the tools that were used.
Yeah. And that's another question that visitors ask us too. They wonder when they look at the art, why didn't they draw faces and houses and whatever? And we always say, well, it's not as if they couldn't, you know, they could do it. I mean, it's just they chose not to, because these were their sacred sites.
Yes.
And obviously the symbolism that they used had to be a little more abstract and a little more obscure than what they would use in their everyday drawings and maps.
To my eye, and I cannot draw at all, Claire, but when I look at the complexity of the motif on the entrance curbstone at K1 and other curbstones which ring some of the cairns, it is an extraordinarily complex, detailed piece of carving, done probably with a harder stone, most likely.
Piece of flint or a piece of quartz.
Piece of flint or quartz. And what's interesting about the choice of the lithology in these mounds is that they chose the stone with great care and intent. And they travelled far in order to source and procure these particular stone types and to bring them here with huge effort.
I often think too, though, that if I was from Wicklow and I came to Newgrange for the Great Gathering, I'd be really pleased to see they had used Wicklow quartz. You know, that it would be a way of including all the people and all the tribes from different parts of this area so that we'd all feel connected to this wonderful monument. But one of the things, and I promised this earlier, one of the things that's really interesting is that when the passage tombs finished, the sense of ritual did not finish in this valley. And many of you will have read that in 2018, or seen the pictures in 2018, when we had that drought, which seems a long way away from Newgrange this morning, we had a very dry summer. And Anthony Murphy and Ken Williams, Anthony is here with us this morning and Ken was here yesterday. So they were here in July and they discovered what was called Dronehenge, or this wonderful henge down below us here in the Boyne Valley. And subsequent to that, John Lawler, who's senior photographer with the National Monuments Service, he and colleagues photographed all of the monuments that were visible in the valley at that time. And you can just see how dry the landscape is. But look at the size of these monuments. And they're all along the Boyne. Sorry, Frank.
Sorry, no. These are all detected through what are called crop marks. And that means differential growth in the vegetation caused by disturbances beneath the ground, causing the crop to grow differentially. And that was detectable during the extreme drought of 2018. And so many monuments subsurface were discovered during that period. And two archaeologists in National Monument Service, Tom Condit and Mark Keegan, produced a beautiful publication entitled A Neolithic Ritual Landscape Revealed. And they published that in 2018 on the web. And in that publication, you can see all of these monuments detailed in all their glory.
Yeah.
And when I look at the geometrical form of some of these, I'm astounded by the regularity and the perfection of some of the design elements in those.
They are so exact.
They are so exact.
So if we can show now the video that was prepared for our exhibition, and this shows you what the landscape at Newgrange would have looked like in the late Neolithic. The date is 2600 BC.
And we need to be mindful that people were settled here from as early as 4000 BC or even before that. And certainly farming, which is, I suppose, the hallmark of the Neolithic era, was going on in this valley at that time from 4000 and onwards, on into the Bronze Age. So there is continuity and succession of habitation and living and monument building. And there is a distinct shift from using stone to timber.
Yeah, these huge outdoor enclosures. Look at these now as we sweep down by the River Boyne.
So many people ask us the question, how vegetated was the landscape at that time? And archaeological studies of pollen and other analysis would tell us that there certainly was a lot of tree felling and land clearing at that time in order to sow crops and to harvest and to live.
We see this huge palisade that enclosed Newgrange. There's the monument that Geraldine Stout excavated.
That's the Cursus monument. And when you look at the symmetry embedded in these concentric circles, simply done, a rope and a peg, scribing a circle in the ground, but nonetheless it is the idea.
And the scale and the ambition. This is the great monument of Doubt.
And two words come into the discussion then, ceremony and ritual.
These are the monuments over near Doubt that were discovered underneath Doubt Hall. And this is the great Dronehenge.
These are enormous earthworks, raised banks, ditches, post holes, entrances, some of which the access through these monuments is meaningful in ways that we don't necessarily understand today, but would have been well understood then in terms of form and function.
To build one of these monuments would be extraordinary.
Yeah.
But the wonder of the Brunabonia World Heritage Site is we have so many monuments from so many periods, and all of them are on such a grand scale.
And we now think of monumentality in the way which I mentioned earlier. It is a landscape lived in. It is monuments tied to that landscape. It is related to the underworld and the journeys of the celestial elements, and it is related to the other world above. So what's called the tripartite worldview. And that is one way, and I think the most important way. So it is the total environmental domain.
Yeah.
That's how we like to describe it. You can't just pick one element and ignore the others. It is all of those things together, which, and in one way, give us insight into the prehistoric past.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is not the only place in Ireland where we have important monuments. Now, we might always boast that ours are the biggest and the best, but there are significant monuments in other parts of the country. And one of those monuments that we have begun to talk about in more and more detail at this time of the year is the monument that our friend Murish O'Sullivan excavated at Knockrow. And the monument at Knockrow is extraordinary, not because of its size or its grandeur, but you tell the big secret that Knockrow has.
Well, Knockrow, which was excavated by Professor Murish O'Sullivan, my mentor, by the way.
Very good.
Hello, Murish, if you're watching. And the discovery by Murish of the two passages within the one mound, replicating in a way on a much smaller scale that which happens at Knowth, where there are two chambers and two passages. And Murray has a lovely subtitle to one of his papers on Knockrow, Little and Large,
Yeah.
comparing Knockrow to Nowth. But here we have the setting sun at the winter solstice, and the previous view was the rising sun in the eastern passage at winter solstice. So again, emphasizing the importance of winter solstice to people in that area as well.
So they have, in the same monument, sunrise
And
sunset
sunset.
at this time of the year.
Illuminating
so
the
you didn't
dead.
have to leave the monument at all. You
No.
could have the party there all
You
day.
brought your lunch.
Yeah, you brought your lunch.
sat
we
there.
we here have to go to Douth.
Yes.
You know, we have to physically leave Newgrange and go to Douth, but they could just stay on site.
On site.
And yesterday, our Neolithic cousins in the other countries were delighted with the shout out. So I want to give another shout out to more Neolithic cousins this morning, specifically the wonderful monument on Slieve Gullion in County Armagh, which is aligned to sunset at winter solstice. And you mentioned Brittany earlier, and we also have connections with Brittany in France and the wonderful monument of Gavronis, which is aligned to sunset at the winter solstice. Are there any other monuments that you know of that are aligned to sunrise at the winter solstice? Sunset seems to be a preference of theirs.
Well, an analysis of the Irish Passage tombs, of which 220 still survive. We don't know how many more are gone.
Yeah.
We have 220, and we have about 130 which are in good enough condition to examine the passages and to investigate orientation. And that shows us, in Ireland at least, that about 22, 23 of them were aligned on the solstice positions, the limiting positions of the sun, rising or setting. And there is a slight preference for the winter solstice, and there is an equal preference for sunset and sunrise. So there are a number of sites around the country exhibiting this phenomenon, this facing the sun, as Gabriel Cooley likes to call it, a lovely way of putting it. So these monuments face the sun in a limited number of cases, not all of them.
Yeah, yeah. But Newgrange is special. I mean, we're always boasting how special Newgrange is, but it really is special.
Oh, very much.
Because it is the only one that has a specially designed opening for the sun.
Yeah.
Although there is a monument in the field in front of us now, to the right of the monument as you look up, which Francis Lynch said when they examined it that it may have had a proto roof box, that it was the hint of a roof box. And sometimes when we go over to Douth South for sunset at the winter solstice, and it's a small little opening, but the curbs, the entrance stone and the passage actually create a kind of a box effect too. So I think the beginnings of the idea was there, but it came to its great achievement here at Newgrange, this specially designed opening for the sun. Just thinking about sunrises, I was talking yesterday or texting yesterday with Alan Betson from the Irish Times, because I always think of him at this time of the year. And Alan has probably photographed the winter solstice at Newgrange more often than anybody else ever. And I just thought I'd pay tribute to Alan's photography this morning with some of his wonderful images that he took over many, many years. And thanks, Alan, for all your help over many years in the chamber at Newgrange. I always love being there with you.
We do wonder that in the Neolithic, did people enter the tomb at this period of the year?
This photograph here was taken on a morning similar to this morning. And Alan asked Leontia, who works with us here, to show the flashlight, to paint the light from the flashlight up onto this corbelled ceiling. And this is one of our glorious mornings. We've had so many. But you know, when all of this is over and I'm sitting in a rocking chair somewhere, it'll be the dark mornings I remember, because I think sometimes on the darker mornings we get deeper and we appreciate the light more and that thought of light more on the dark mornings than we do on the bright ones. On the bright mornings, we're inclined to take it for granted, but on the dark mornings, we go inside and we turn off the lights and we wait, and there is something extraordinary happens when you're waiting in the chamber at Newgrange for the sun to rise. And when the lights go down and people relax, there's a intimacy to the chat that no, I have never experienced anywhere else. And it's not just because we're in a dark room chatting. It's because we're in a very special dark room chatting. And we would like to show you now, we haven't seen the sun over the last couple of days, but we have been preparing for the sun's visit. And we would love to share with you the view this morning from inside the chamber at Newgrange, because it's very rarely that you get a chance to see an empty chamber. And these are where our cameras are positioned. This one is looking up the first was looking up the passage, and then there it is again. And this is just taken from inside the roof box looking forward. And if you zoom in, if you can zoom in just to the middle of that shot, you can see a triangle of light near the middle of the picture. And that is where the beam of light has to reach. So you see there is a bend in the passage. It's so carefully engineered. There's a bend in the passage. So the light comes through the roof box, and the builders of the monument used the passage almost like a photographer uses the focus on a camera to narrow down that beam so that only a very thin line of light comes in. And then this is the view out. Now you cannot see from this angle exactly where the view of the roof box, but it would be, if you were down on the floor like you saw in Professor O'Kelly, the video of Professor O'Kelly yesterday, it's over to the right-hand side as you enter. And if you can just pan around a little bit, please, just to show our viewers where we are. This camera is in the back recess of the chamber at Newgrange. This is live from the monument now. And in the back recess, you will see the fantastic tri-spiral.
That motif has influenced so much art in this country and beyond.
And if you look, if we can pan down to the basin in that recess, there's an interesting story to this, you know, because Professor Tom Ray, when he did his research, he said that the beam of light would have reached the back of this recess. But unfortunately, the basin stone there was broken. And it would be wonderful to know if anything had been placed in the light to reflect back out the light or to contain the light. There is no extraordinary art on the back wall where the sun shone, but the tri-spiral is there. And the tri-spiral is the motif from Irish and European prehistory. There's a lovely, there's the tri-spiral again.
The aspect of that motif is somewhat hidden. The direct light from the rising sun does not strike that part of the recess. But nonetheless, the intensity of the illumination in the chamber on a glorious sunrise day would have been sufficient for that motif to be well visible by anybody positioned in the chamber during those days.
And the person who carved that wonderful piece of art lived over 5,000 years ago, and it still has the power to move us just with its sheer skill, confidence, and drama. And it's quite small, but it is so perfect. We have another view from the camera that's suspended above the floor. So perhaps you'd explain what those yellow dots are on the floor, Frank.
Well, last year, an interdisciplinary project was conceived at your suggestion, Claire, and Michael McDonough, our chief archaeologist, expedited it with Office of Public Works and my own university, TU Dublin, and we contrived a project to try and map and photograph and dimensionally record the sunbeam. And that was quite a challenge. An aerial camera looking down on the floor was the first installation. And then we had to have dimensional control markers within the chamber. And the guardrail posts, which you can see just in the bottom of the picture, were marked with reflective tape. The two end posts in the left-hand chamber were removed, but we put in ground markers there as well. You can see one of them there now. And you can see the yellow tape. And fortuitously, the Discovery programme had laser scanned the monument previously, and we had sort of come to the idea that in their laser scan, which was geo-referenced or on the national grid, that these guardrail posts would also be included in the scan, and so they were.
Yeah.
And on examining the scans, we were able to extract the location of these points of reference, coordinates, if you like, on the national grid, and then we marked them. And then John Lawler, the senior photographer, in his photography, was able to, in the darkness of the chamber, on every image, those marks showed.
Yeah.
Now, digitally, they could be removed afterwards. But that gave us, in a sense, control points, dimensional control to scale our drawings and to orientate our drawings and produce the wonderful illustrations which are now published in Archaeology Ireland, the December edition. And it's all described there.
Yeah. And if we can pan up from the floor towards the right-hand recess so that we can show our viewers the basin stones in the right-hand recess. Aren't they just fantastic? Now, the bottom stone is actually too big to bring in after you have made that recess. So some archaeologists believe that that bottom stone might have been there already, and that the upper stone, the wonderful granite basin, was placed on top to draw attention even more to this Holy of Holies. And that upper basin is carved from granite. And you were talking earlier about the tools that the builders used. They carved that stone with another stone, and it is perfectly made. And as I mentioned earlier, these basins held the remains of the dead. Now, when Professor O'Kelly was excavating in the 1960s, there were no remains still on the basin because the monument had been open for nearly 300 years. But some of the bone and some of the cremated bone and small pieces of unburnt bones were found on the floor beside the basin. And he very carefully collected those bones, one of which was identified as an inner ear bone. And they were stored by our colleagues in the National Museum very carefully. And years later, the very brilliant Dr. Lara Cassidy was doing her PhD, and she decided that she would see if she could get DNA, ancient DNA, from that small piece of bone. And Frank, what did she find? Were we amazed or what?
Pure evidence of an elite having been buried within the tomb. And with other analysis of other bone fragments from around the country, she pieced together an amazing jigsaw of evidence and interpreted it. And all of that is published.
Yeah. So the people whose bones were left here, the person whose bone she examined, he was born as a result of incest.
Yes.
So he was either the result of a father and daughter union or a brother and sister union. So they are
royal blood.
Royal blood.
Royal blood.
And it was amazing when we heard that news first. And I don't know why it was so amazing, because we knew that these places were extraordinary. But what amused me was that all the years I have worked at Newgrange, I had been telling our visitors that these people are just like us. And all of a sudden I had to change the story completely, because they are not like us. These were royalty. They considered themselves above the normal people.
And those kind of discoveries, they feed into the narrative of hierarchical social organization in the Boyne Valley and beyond.
And if you pan up from above the basin stone to the cathedral-like chambered roof, corbelled roof, which is totally waterproof and beautifully built.
And wildlife inhabits the burial chamber.
Yeah.
Not just humans visiting, but we have a species of bat, which are resident between the crevices of the corbelling. Happily fly around the chamber, even in wintertime, Claire. We were in there recently and I was amazed.
Yeah, you see, it's a constant temperature in there, so they have a lovely little home to live in. And that's something that amazes us always, is how quickly wildlife reclaims these monuments when they're closed to the public. And my famous story is in 2001, when the monument was closed because of the foot and mouth epidemic, that a badger tried to move into the chamber.
And why shouldn't he?
Yeah, talk about a special place to live. So if you can just show the overhead shot again, from the looking down on the floor, I would love to play out this broadcast with another view of John Lawler's fantastic photographs from December 24th. So if we can just show our viewers where the light shines on the shortest days.
The next footage, you will see the beam coming into the chamber from right to left, towards the end recess on the left-hand side of your picture.
And just looking at those wonderful images from last winter, we're going to leave you for this morning and for this winter solstice. But before we leave you, I have a series of people that I wish to thank. I want to thank all my colleagues in the Office of Public Works who have been so supportive to us over these last few days. Our Minister, Patrick O'Donovan, came here to Newgrange yesterday for his first solstice, and I won't think it'll be his last, because he really enjoyed being here. So I want to thank him and all our colleagues in head office. But I want to specifically thank the staff of Brunabonia Visitor Centre, the guides, the bus drivers, all of us who work so hard all year to bring these monuments and the story of these monuments to life. I would love to thank Sinead Gargan, Tommy Halton and everybody in the Trim National Monuments Depot, and a special shout out to Shane Brennan, who has been here morning, noon and night over the last few days. Thank you very much, Shane. We want to thank our IT section, especially Kieran Murta. And we want to thank Barry and Niall in the press office, who did such a fantastic job of getting the story and our images right across the world. I would also like to thank our National Monuments section, particularly Jacqueline McHale and Breda McWalter. In the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the National Monument Service, I would like to thank Michael McDonough, John Lawler, Pauline Gleeson, Claire Breen, Tony Roach and Lynn MacDonald. And creative technology have brought the pictures from here to you. And I just want to especially mention Jeff, Niamh, Ronan, but all of the production crew. I want to thank you for watching and keeping vigil with us for the last 3 mornings. I want to thank the people who came, especially the people who came yesterday and again this morning, especially this morning who braved the elements, but the people who came yesterday gave us such a sense of joy that things were coming right again. We want to take all the people who contacted us, who wrote into us. We appreciate all the message. We can feel the good wishes coming from all over the world to this small bit of ground in County Meath. I want to thank Ken Williams again for all his wonderful photographs. He brings the monuments to a degree that no other photographer I have ever seen. He and John Lawler are both fantastic. And finally, I want to thank my dear friend Frank Prendergast. As I said last year, if I have to stand here at Newgrange on a wet morning, there is nobody I would prefer to stand alongside. So thank you very much for your patience and your knowledge and your kindness over not only this solstice, but over many solstices. I really do appreciate it.
My privilege.
Thank you. And just before we leave you, we're safely launched into a new year. We have another year behind us. We will be back. We will get stronger. We are resilient. If there is one message the monument teaches us, is that everything passes, but that the resilience and the strength remains. So go merimid bio eganam seo harish. Good morning from Newgrange. Thank you.